Marinth Ella didn't tap her glass gently. She struck it like a judge calling for order. The restaurant fell silent instantly. 40 guests turned toward her, including Roy, who had been holding my hand just moments before. She raised her glass toward him, but her eyes were locked on me. "Let's begin with the truth," she said, her voice carrying across the room like a verdict. "Roy has fulfilled his part. Now it's time for Aurelia to fulfill hers. She promised she wouldn't keep what never belonged to her." My fork froze against porcelain. The sound echoed in my head. Roy didn't look at me. He looked down, as if her words were familiar, rehearsed, expected, like they'd practiced this moment without me. People whispered, some chuckled nervously. Others leaned forward, eager to watch whatever drama was about to unfold. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for me to react, to defend myself, to crumble. But I sat still, my pulse steady, because 30 minutes before this dinner, I had opened an old toy box from my childhood and found a letter my mother never meant for me to read. A letter that proved she had been lying for 20 years, and Roy had fallen for every word. The weight of that letter sat in my purse like a loaded gun. I didn't speak, I didn't cry. I just watched my mother smile at the crowd like she'd won something precious. She had no idea what I knew, no idea that everything she'd built was about to crumble, no idea that this was the last time she would ever control me. My name is Aurelia Thorne. I'm 32 years old, and I used to think endurance was a virtue, that swallowing pain quietly made me strong. I believed that if I loved hard enough, worked hard enough, forgave enough, everything would balance out. That sacrifice was the same as love, that giving until you had nothing left was what good daughters did. But that was before I learned what happens when you're raised by someone who rewrites your memories to suit their needs. Before I understood that some people don't love you, they own you. My mother wasn't always cruel, at least not in ways you could point at. Her methods were soft, silent, like hands gidding clay. A comment here, a rule there, a reminder that echoed through my childhood like a song I never asked to learn but somehow knew by heart. "You owe us, Aurelia, you owe the family everything." I was 7 when she first told me I had made a promise. I didn't remember it then. I don't remember it now. But she repeated it so often, to relatives, to neighbors, to teachers, to Roy, that it became a kind of folklore, a legend in my own life, a story I never agreed to but one everyone believed without question. She told it at birthday parties, at graduations, at family dinners, at my wedding, and each time I felt smaller. Like I was disappearing into a story someone else had written, a story where I was never the hero, just the sacrifice. Some people are raised to shine, others are raised to reflect their light. Selise Arden was everything I wasn't allowed to be. She was my cousin, but Marinth treated her like the daughter she wished she'd had instead of me. Beautiful in the way that made adults sigh and say things like, "She'll break hearts someday." Confident in a way that made teachers bend rules and excuse her when she didn't turn in assignments. She moved through childhood like the world tilted itself to keep her from falling. And maybe it did, because everyone around her made sure she never had to struggle. I was the opposite. The kid is standing slightly behind her in every photograph, the one who didn't need as much, the one told to understand why she got the bigger piece, the new dress, the extra compliment, the one who was always strong enough to handle less. She was the sun, I was the shadow they insisted I stay inside. Marinth adored her. "Selise needs things, Aurelia, you're strong, you can handle less, you don't need what she needs, you've always been so independent." Independent was her word for neglect, for dismissed, forgotten. The first time Roy met her, he said, "She looks like the version of you your mother always wanted." He laughed when he said it like it was a joke. I laughed too, because that's what you do when someone accidentally tells the truth and doesn't realize how much it hurts. But later, much later, I realized she was not a coincidence. She was part of the promise. The golden child who would inherit everything I earned, everything I built, everything I loved, even my husband. People think betrayal happens suddenly. It doesn't. It grows quietly like mold behind a wall. You don't see it until the structure starts to collapse, and by then the damage is already done. When I was 12, my savings disappeared. 3 years of birthday money, allowances I'd earned from chores, everything. Marinth said Selise needed emergency tutoring, that her grades were slipping, and if we didn't act fast, her future would be ruined. I remember asking why we couldn't use Marinth's money. She said I was being selfish, that family helps the family, that I'd understand when I was older. At 15, she used my competition scholarship money to pay for Selise's travel fees to a dance camp in California. I'd won that scholarship for a science fair project I'd worked on for months. The money was supposed to go toward my college fund. Instead, it went toward Selaiz's summer vacation. When I cried, Marinth told me I was being dramatic, that Selaiz deserved opportunities too, that I'd have other chances. At 19, she persuaded me to sign over the first car I ever bought. I'd worked 2 jobs to afford it, saved for 2 years, but Selaiz needed a car to get to her new internship and mine was nicer, more reliable. Marinth promised it was temporary, just for 6 months, that became permanent. When I asked for it back, Selaiz said she needed it more than I did. Marinth agreed, and I walked away with nothing but a bus pass and another lesson in how little I mattered. Temporary became permanent, every single time. And when I protested, she'd tilt her head, soften her voice and say, "Aurelia, don't embarrass yourself. You promised, don't you remember?" Promised what, promised why, I didn't know, but everyone else seemed to, and eventually I stopped asking. Because asking only made me look selfish, ungrateful, cruel. The first cut rarely bleeds, it just teaches your skin how to open. And by the time I was 25, I had learned not to feel the knife anymore. I just bled quietly and cleaned up the mess. That's what good daughters do. That's what I thought love required. I was wrong. I met Roy Drace in my sophomore year of college. He was a year ahead of me studying business management. He held himself like someone who didn't need to prove anything. A quiet confidence. A warmth that didn't fade the moment someone prettier walked by. He noticed me in the library one night when I was crying over a failed exam, instead of walking past. He sat down and asked if I was okay. He listened, really listened. When I told him about my family, about the constant giving, about feeling invisible, he said something that made me cry harder. "You deserve someone who chooses you, not someone who takes from you, someone who sees you." I believed him. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored the small signs that maybe he didn't fully understand what he was promising. We dated for 3 years. He was patient, kind, he never raised his voice. He remembered the small things, like how I took my coffee with too much sugar and not enough cream, or the way I needed silence after a long day. He brought me flowers for no reason. He called when he said he would. He made me feel like I mattered. When he proposed under the winter lights at the park where we used to walk, I thought I had finally found safety. Someone who saw me, someone who would protect me from the endless taking, someone who would choose me over everyone else. I didn't know he would later choose my mother's stories over my truths, or that he would become the final piece of her lifelong plan. Love feels safest when you find it after living without it, but sometimes safety is just another cage, and sometimes the person holding the key isn't who you think it is. Roy met Marinth at Thanksgiving during our 2nd year of dating. I was nervous. I wanted them to like each other, but I also knew my mother had a way of turning people against me without them even realizing it. She smiled too widely when she opened the door, hugged him too long, and asked too many questions. She called him son by dessert before he'd even finished his first plate. Then she said something strange, something that should have been a warning. "Well, Roy, if you stay in Aurelia's life, I suppose you'll be part of all our agreements, all our little family arrangements." When I asked what she meant later that night, she brushed it off. "Oh, sweetheart, don't overthink, it's just a family joke, you know how we are." She smiled when she said it, but her eyes were calculating, like she was measuring his response, testing him. Roy laughed. I pretended to, but something in her tone felt wrong. Like she was planting seeds, testing him, seeing if he would bend the way I always had, seeing if he could be molded. Some red flags come embroidered as compliments. That dinner was full of them. She complimented his job, his manners, his ambition, but every compliment came with a clause, a suggestion, a gentle push toward her version of our future. She told him I'd always been responsible, that I took care of the family, that I understood sacrifice better than most people my age. I should have seen it then, but I was too grateful someone loved me to notice they were being recruited, too desperate for approval to realize I was watching my future being rewritten in real time. Selaiz turned 21 the following spring. Big party. Marinth rented out a banquet hall. There were over 100 guests, photos everywhere, a professional photographer, a 3-tier cake, everything I never got for any of my birthdays. Marinth gave a speech in front of everyone. She stood at the microphone with a glass of champagne, smiling like a proud mother. "Selaiz, darling, you're entering a new chapter of your life, and I want everyone here to know that Aurelia is keeping her promise to protect your future, to make sure you have everything you need to succeed." Everyone clapped. Some people even turned to look at me, smiling like I'd done something noble, like I was a saint. Roy looked at me like he had just connected dots I couldn't see. His expression changed. Something shifted behind his eyes. Confusion, curiosity, maybe even suspicion. "What promise?" I whispered to him later in the car. He said nothing, just stared out the window, and that silence changed everything. Memory can be forged if repeated with enough confidence. After that night, Roy started asking questions. Not to me, to Marinth, to Selais, to people who had heard the story so many times they believed it was gospel. He called my mother when I wasn't home. He had coffee with Selais. He asked relatives about my childhood. And slowly he started treating me differently. Like I was holding something back. Like I owed an explanation I didn't have. Like I was the liar. I tried to tell him there was no promise. That it was a childhood game. A misunderstanding. A story my mother had twisted into something it never was. But he'd already chosen who to believe, and it wasn't me. Roy proposed under winter lights at the park we used to walk through every weekend. The trees were wrapped in white bulbs. Snow was falling gently. It should have been perfect. I cried. I said yes. I thought this was my new beginning. My escape from a family that only saw me as a resource. Marinth's reaction was strange. She didn't cry tears of joy. She didn't hug me the way mothers do in movies. She just nodded slowly like she was checking something off a list and said, "It's about time. Selais is ready for her next phase." Her tone was off, mechanical, like my engagement was a box she needed checked. A step in a plan I wasn't aware of. I asked her what she meant. She smiled and said, "Oh, nothing, sweetheart, I'm just so happy for you both." But I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't about my happiness. This was about control. Even love can be a currency if someone else is holding the scale. I didn't understand then. But she wasn't celebrating my future. She was celebrating Selais's birthday, because the promise, whatever it was, always ended with her. Every road led back to the golden child, and I was just the paving stone. Roy and I started planning the wedding, but every decision felt controlled. Marinth insisted on the venue, said she knew the owner, that we'd get a discount. Selais chose the colours, said she had a better eye for design. Roy agreed to everything they suggested, every single thing. When I tried to suggest something different, something I actually wanted, he'd say, "Let's just keep the peace, Aurelia, it's easier this way." Easier for who? Not for me, but I stayed quiet, because that's what I'd been trained to do. Stay quiet, don't make waves, don't be difficult. I felt like a guest at my own wedding, and when I tried to speak up I was told I was being difficult, ungrateful, selfish, so I stopped trying. I just smiled and nodded and let them plan the wedding like I wasn't even there. On my wedding day, Marinth wore white, not ivory, not cream, not champagne, pure bridal white. When I saw her, my stomach dropped. I asked her to change. She refused, said it was her favourite dress, that I was being controlling, that it was just a colour. Selais walked around greeting guests like it was her event. She wore a dress that looked suspiciously like a second bridal gown. Lace, flowing, elegant, people whispered. Some thought she was the bride, she didn't correct them. She smiled and posed for pictures like she was the star of the show. When I finally reached the altar, Roy leaned in and whispered, "Your mother said something this morning, something about not getting too attached." I almost froze mid-step, my heart pounded. What? Why would she say that? He hesitated, his eyes darting away. "I don't know, she said you'd understand someday, that everything was temporary." I didn't, not then. Before a house collapses, it groans. My wedding day was full of groaning. Little cracks, strange comments, looks exchanged between Marinth and Roy, between Selais and the guests. But I smiled through it all because I thought marriage would protect me. I thought becoming Roy's wife would finally make me untouchable, that I'd have someone on my side. I thought Roy would choose me. I was wrong. Months into the marriage, Roy changed. Not abruptly, not overnight, gradually, like a slow poison working through his system. He started calling my mother for advice about things he used to ask me about, started telling Selais about our finances, about my work, about our plans. I started using Marinth's tone with me, her words, her phrases. "Aurelia, don't be dramatic. Selais needs support, she's family. Your mother said you used to be more generous. What happened to you? You know someone loves you by how they correct lies about you." Roy never corrected a single one. He absorbed them, repeated them, became an echo of Marinth's voice. It was like watching someone I loved disappear and be replaced by a stranger wearing his face. It wasn't just a shift, it was an indoctrination. And I was too loyal, too trained to please, too desperate to make my marriage work, to notice the grooming happening right in front of me. He started coming home late, stopped asking about my day, stopped touching me the way he used to. The warmth was gone, replaced by distance, by coldness. And when I tried to talk about it, when I tried to ask what was wrong, he'd say I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, that I was creating problems where there were none. But I wasn't imagining anything. I was watching my husband become a stranger. I was watching the man I loved turn into someone I didn't recognize. Someone who looked at me like I was an obligation instead of a partner. Roy insisted we merge finances completely. Every account, every asset, everything in both our names. I hesitated. Something in my gut told me to wait. But he said marriage was about trust, about partnership, about building a life together, so I agreed. Marriage is partnership, right? Then little things started happening. A $4,000 withdrawal. When I asked about it, Roy said it was for Selai's. She needed money for rent. A $7,800 investment, your mother's idea. She said it was a good opportunity. 2 accounts moved into joint access without my signature. When I confronted him, he acted like I'd given permission, like I'd forgotten. Why didn't you ask me? I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He replied without looking up from his phone, you always said you wanted to support your family. I'm just helping you keep your promise. No, that wasn't me, that was her. That was Marinth's voice coming out of his mouth. If you're raised to give without question, someone will always take without guilt. Money started disappearing faster, larger amounts. Roy made decisions without consulting me, signed documents without telling me, transferred funds without my knowledge. And when I questioned him, when I showed him the statements, when I asked for explanations, he'd get defensive, angry even. Your mother said you'd react like this. She warned me you'd get possessive about money. Selai said you've always been jealous of her, that you've never wanted her to succeed. This is what you promised, Aurelia. Why are you backing out now? I felt like I was going insane, like my own memories were wrong. Like everything I knew about myself was a lie, like I was the problem. That's what gaslighting does. It doesn't just make you doubt others, it makes you doubt yourself. It makes you question reality. It makes you wonder if you're the villain in your own story. Late one night around 11, there was a knock on my door. Roy was working late, or so he said. I opened it to find Selai standing there, arms crossed, smiling like she owned the world. She walked past me without being invited in. Sat on my couch like she owned it, legs crossed, confidence, comfortable, like she'd been there 100 times before. You know Roy was supposed to be with me, right? She said casually, examining her nails. I stared at her, stunned. My mouth opened but no words came out. Your mother said you promised I'd get the life that matched my potential. The career, the money, the house, the husband, everything, including him. Nothing hurts like discovering you've been volunteered for your own erasure. What promise? I asked, my voice shaking. What are you talking about? She smirked, that same smirk I'd seen 1,000 times growing up, the smirk of someone who always got what they wanted. Oh, Aurelia, you really don't know, do you? Your mother has been planning this since we were kids. She told Roy everything. About how you promised to give me the life you'd build. How you said I deserved the best of everything you'd ever earn. That smirk never left me. It haunted me. It was the smirk of someone who had been told the ending of a story I didn't know I was in. A story where I was written out, where everything I loved was transferred to her, where I was nothing but a placeholder until she was ready to take my place. She left that night without another word. Just stood up, smoothed her dress and walked out like she'd just delivered a message, like she'd completed a task. And I sat in the dark, trying to understand how my entire life had become a script I never agreed to read. How everyone around me knew my lines except me. The day of the anniversary dinner, I was cleaning out the attic. Roy had asked me to find some old tax documents. I pulled down boxes I hadn't opened in years. Childhood things my mother had stored there when we moved. Toys, books, photos. Then I found an old wooden toy box. Pink with white flowers painted on it. I remembered that box. I used to keep my dolls in it. Inside was a yellow envelope. My name was written on it in Marinth's handwriting. Neat, precise, deliberate. Underneath my name it said, "The day she understands." My hands shook as I opened it. The paper inside was old, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear. The letter explained everything. When I was 6, Selais and I played princess in the backyard. I was the servant, she was the queen. It was just pretend, just a game little girls play. At some point I said the way children do, "I'll give you everything I ever get so you can have a perfect life, Your Majesty." A childish joke. A line from a game of make-believe, words that meant nothing. But Marinth had written it down, dated it, saved it, and turned it into a binding contract. She told everyone, repeated it for decades, built her entire strategy around a 6-year-old's imaginary promise to a cousin playing dress-up. The letter went on. Marinth wrote about how she'd always known I was strong, that I didn't need much, that Selais was special, fragile, deserving, that it was my job, my purpose, to make sure Selais had everything she needed to shine. Truth doesn't free you, it shatters you first. I read that letter 3 times, each time my anger grew sharper. Clearer, colder, not the hot, explosive kind, the icy kind, the kind that calculates, the kind that plans. Roy believed it, Selais weaponized it, Marinth orchestrated it. And I had been the fool paying the price for 25 years. I'd given up scholarships, savings, cars, opportunities, peace, and now they wanted my marriage too, my home, my future. But not anymore. That night at the anniversary dinner Marinth had insisted on hosting, she stood and humiliated me in front of 40 people. She called me selfish, said I was breaking my promise, said Roy deserved better, that Selais deserved better, that I'd always been the difficult one, the ungrateful one. The room watched Roy, waiting for him to defend me, to stand up, to say something. He lowered his eyes, not in shock, not in disagreement, in acceptance, like he'd heard this speech before, like he agreed with every word. That was the moment my love for him cracked like glass, not broken yet, but ready to shatter. One more hit and it would be dust. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't make a scene. I excused myself calmly, told everyone I needed to use the restroom, and walked out with my head high. I went to the restroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She was tired, hollow, erased, a ghost of who she used to be. But underneath that exhaustion something else stirred, something sharp, something that had been buried for too long. Anger. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that plans, that calculates, that doesn't forgive, that doesn't forget. I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, and I decided right then, standing in that parking lot under the streetlights, that I was done being the shadow, done being the sacrifice, done being erased. Silence is not surrender, sometimes it's preparation. I went home that night and locked myself in my office. I didn't confront Roy when he came home an hour later, didn't call Marinth, didn't call Selais, didn't break down or scream or cry. I opened my laptop and created a new folder on my desktop. I named it Exit Plan. Inside I started gathering everything. Bank statements going back 3 years, emails between Roy and Marinth, text messages, photos of Marinth wearing jewelry she'd taken from me over the years, recordings of conversations where she coached Roy on how to handle me, how to convince me, how to control me. Every forged signature on documents I never signed, every financial transfer I hadn't authorized, every withdrawal Roy made without telling me, every lie Marinth told and every person who repeated it, screenshots, PDFs, audio files, everything. I wasn't leaving empty-handed, I wasn't leaving quietly, and I definitely wasn't leaving defeated. A lifetime of being controlled has taught me discipline, patience, how to move without being seen, how to smile while bleeding, how to survive. Now I would weaponize every single lesson. I worked through the night. By morning I had a file thick enough to bury them all, organized, labeled, dated, ready. Roy never even noticed I'd been up all night. He just kissed my forehead, said he had an early meeting and left, like nothing was wrong. Like I was still the same compliant wife who'd let him do whatever he wanted. He had no idea the woman he married no longer existed. My lawyer Atticus Venn was recommended by a colleague at work. She said he was ruthless, thorough, the kind of lawyer who didn't lose. I called him the next morning and made an appointment. He read the letter twice, slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock to something close to awe. Aurelia, he said, setting the letter down carefully, this is psychological coercion and long-term financial abuse. You've got a case most people dream of having. Dream, strange word for a nightmare. But he meant a case that wins, a case that destroys. When you've been gaslit long enough, paperwork becomes a weapon. He instructed me carefully, move assets into a trust, freeze joint accounts, secure my business under my name alone. Revoke the power of attorney Marinth had forged years ago when she convinced me to sign documents I didn't fully read. File for asset protection. Document everything, record everything, say nothing to anyone. I followed every instruction calmly, methodically, like I was following a recipe. Roy noticed nothing. He was too busy planning something with Marinth and Selais. I heard them on the phone late at night. Whispers, laughter, excitement. They thought I was broken, that I'd give up, that I'd fold like I always had, that I'd hand over everything quietly because that's what I always did. They had no idea I was 3 steps ahead. While they were celebrating, I was building a case that would destroy them all. The next week I found divorce papers on the kitchen table, just sitting there, like trash, like something casual. Initiated by Roy, filed 3 days earlier without telling me. Not for separation, not for irreconcilable differences, for financial dissolution, the kind that strips one spouse of rights, the kind designed to leave someone with nothing. His stated reason made my blood run cold. To restore the original promise to Selais' future and reallocate marital assets accordingly. There's a special kind of betrayal, reserved for people who think you're too weak to fight back. My hands went cold, not from hurt, not from sadness, from clarity, crystal clear, sharp-edged clarity. They wanted my home, my business, my savings, my investments, my car, my jewelry, everything. They wanted to erase me completely, like I'd never existed, like I'd never mattered. But they didn't know I had already moved everything where they could never reach it. Accounts closed. New accounts opened in banks they didn't know about, trusts established with lawyers they'd never meet, properties retitled, business restructured. Roy had filed for divorce, but he'd filed against a ghost. Because the woman he thought he married, the woman he thought he could control, no longer existed on paper. She'd vanished, and in her place was someone he should have been afraid of. Atticus kept digging, he was thorough, relentless, and he found something that changed everything. Text messages between Selais and Marinth going back 2 years. Hundreds of them. Roy is almost ready, just keep reinforcing the promise story. Aurelia is starting to question things, we need to move faster. Once the divorce is final you can have him, you can have everything. Selais wasn't trying to steal Roy because she loved him, she wanted him because I had him. Envy wears many masks, but admiration is never one of them. She'd spent her whole life wanting what I had, not because it was valuable, but because it was mine, and taking it made her feel powerful. But there was more, something even darker. Atticus found private debts in Roy's name. Huge ones, gambling debts, bad investments, money he'd borrowed from people who don't take no for an answer. If Roy stayed married to me, creditors could seize his assets, but my income was higher, my credit is better, so they'd come after me first, after everything I'd built. But if he divorced me under the grounds of restoring a familial promise, if he could prove I'd agreed to give everything to Selais, then marital assets could be reallocated, transferred, hidden. And his debts would vanish, or at least they wouldn't be his problem anymore, they'd be mine. People rarely betray for love, they betray fear. Roy didn't betray me for Selais. He betrayed me to save himself, and he was willing to destroy me to do it. I now held everything, every piece of evidence I needed. Recordings of Marinth coaching Roy, paperwork showing forged signatures, transfer histories proving unauthorized withdrawals, text messages between Marinth and Selais planning my erasure, evidence of coercion spanning decades, proof of financial exploitation, the manipulated childhood promise, Roy's hidden debts. Everything. I wasn't the prey anymore, I was the storm. Atticus filed motions, restraining orders against Marinth and Selais, fraud claims, asset protection orders, injunctions freezing every account Roy had access to. I moved through it all like clockwork. Calm, precise, deadly. Roy tried calling. 23 times the first day, I didn't answer. Marinth showed up at my door pounding, screaming, I didn't open it. Selais sent texts, apologies mixed with threats, begging mixed with insults. I screenshot everything and forwarded it to Atticus. I grew teeth in silence, and when the time came I didn't explode, I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I executed. Calmly, precisely, like someone who'd been planning this for years, because in a way I had been, I just didn't know it until now. Every lesson in patience, every moment of swallowing my anger, every time I stayed quiet when I should have screamed, It had all been preparation. And now I was ready. Roy was served papers during a corporate gala, the biggest night of his career. He'd spent months planning it, schmoozing investors, securing a sponsorship deal that would save his failing firm. Cameras everywhere, press, investors, partners, everyone who mattered in his industry. I made sure of it. Some justice must be delivered where the audience is largest. Security approached him during his speech, handed him an envelope. He tried to wave them off. They insisted. He opened it on stage under the lights with 300 people watching. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. He looked around the room, searching desperately. For me, for help, for an escape. I stood at the back of the ballroom, half hidden behind a column, watching. Our eyes met across the room. He mouthed something, I think it was, Aurelia, please. But the stage lights made everything clear. Every camera captured his face, his shock, his fear, his collapse. He was the architect of his own destruction, and now everyone knows it. By the end of the night, investors had pulled out, partners distanced themselves, the sponsorship deal fell through. His reputation was in ruins, and I felt nothing, not satisfied, not revenge, just the quiet relief of someone who'd finally stopped carrying weight that was never theirs to bear. Marinth had illegally transferred my deceased father's cabin to her name 8 years ago. I didn't know until Atticus dug into property records during discovery. My father left that cabin to me in his will, but Marinth forged my signature on a quitclaim deed and transferred ownership to herself. She'd been renting it out for years, pocketing the income, telling me it was sitting empty. The higher the throne, the louder the fall. Atticus reversed the deed, filed fraud charges with the district attorney, presented evidence to a judge. The day the sheriffs came to evict her, I was there, not to gloat, just to witness. Marinth screamed, I cried, called me ungrateful, a traitor, a monster, accused me of destroying the family. Neighbors came out to watch, people she'd known for decades, people she'd told stories to about her wonderful daughters. Now they saw the truth. She looked at me one last time before getting into her car. Her face twisted with rage and something else, disbelief, like she couldn't understand how I'd done this, how the daughter she'd controlled for 30 years had finally fought back. I didn't say a word, just watched her drive away. It's not betrayal to remove someone who has spent years dismantling you. She called later, left voicemails, 37 of them, send letters, showed up at my work. I didn't respond, not once. Because there's a point where forgiveness becomes participation, and I was done participating in my own destruction. She lost the house, lost her standing in the community, lost the control she'd spent decades building, lost every relationship she'd weaponized against me. And I didn't lose a single night's sleep over it. When the financial forensic report came out, Sellize's entire world collapsed. The report detailed every transaction, every dollar she'd taken from accounts that weren't hers, every luxury she'd funded with money that belonged to me. Lavish trips to Europe, designer clothes, rent for apartments she couldn't afford, a car lease, spa treatments, restaurant bills, everything is itemized, everything is documented, everything is illegal. People who build their lives on stolen foundations eventually collapse with them. She wasn't charged criminally. Atticus said it would be hard to prove intent beyond reasonable doubt, but she was exposed. And for someone like Sellize, someone who lived for appearances, that was worse than prison. Her social circle cut her off immediately. The influencer lifestyle she'd built crumbled overnight. Sponsorships pulled out. Friends stopped answering her calls. Invitations dried up. Her Instagram comments are filled with people calling her a thief, a fraud, a parasite. The job offers she'd been bragging about vanished. Companies that had been interested suddenly weren't returning her emails. She called me once, 3 a.m, drunk or crying or both. I listened to the whole voicemail. She begged, apologized, said she didn't know it would go this far, that Marinth had convinced her it was all rightfully hers, that she was sorry, that she'd pay me back, that we were family. Family, that word had been used against me my entire life. I deleted the voicemail, then I blocked her number. Because some people don't deserve a second chance. They deserve the consequences they spent years avoiding. They deserve to feel what they made others feel. With all evidence presented, with Roy's debts exposed, with the forged promise revealed as childhood fiction, I filed for annulment. Not divorce, annulment. The marriage was declared void, like it never happened, like those years were erased from the record. Due to concealed debt, fraud, manipulation, and coercion, the court agreed the marriage had been entered under false pretenses. Sometimes freedom is quiet, sometimes it's deafening. Roy lost everything: his marital claims, his business which collapsed under the weight of his debts and destroyed reputation, his credibility in the industry, his home which was seized by creditors. I walked away clean, untouched, whole, with everything that was mine, plus the father's cabin I'd reclaimed, plus damages the court awarded me for emotional distress and financial fraud. Roy tried to reach me afterward, sent letters to my lawyer, showed up at places he thought I'd be, the grocery store, the gym, my favorite coffee shop. But I had already moved, changed my number, started over in a different part of the city. Because healing isn't about confrontation. It's about distance. It's about removing yourself from the toxicity so completely that it can't reach you anymore. And I finally had enough distance, enough space, enough freedom. I rebuilt my life slowly, deliberately. The cabin became my refuge, my safe place. Every weekend, I drove 2 hours north to the mountains, to the place my father had loved, the place where I'd spent childhood summers before Marinth poisoned everything. I renovated it myself, stripped the old wallpaper, painting the walls soft colors made me feel calm, replaced the furniture, made it mine. My business grew. I'd always been good at my job, but now, without the constant drain of supporting people who didn't appreciate it, I excelled. I hired people I trusted, built systems that didn't rely on anyone's approval but my own, took risks I'd been too afraid to take before. My income doubled, then tripled. But more than that, my peace returned. Healing isn't a place, it's the moment you realize you're no longer trying to earn love, you're just living. I made new friends, real ones, people who didn't take it, who didn't demand, who didn't require me to shrink so they could shine. People who saw me and didn't ask me to be anyone else. I joined a book club at the local library, started taking pottery classes on Thursday nights. I met a woman named Carmen who taught me how to garden. I started painting again, something I'd loved as a teenager but abandoned because Marinth said it was a waste of time, that I should focus on practical things, on things that made money, on things that could support Selais. Now I painted for hours, badly at first, then better, then beautifully. I travelled, alone, without asking permission, without justifying the cost, without bringing back gifts for people who didn't deserve them. I went to Iceland, to Portugal, to New Zealand, to places I'd only dreamed about because I'd always been told my money was needed elsewhere. I learned what it felt like to live without fear, without guilt, without the constant weight of other people's expectations crushing me. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. Years passed, 3 of them. Time moves differently now, slower, richer, fuller. I heard through distant relatives that Roy had moved into a small apartment across town, that he was working a regular job, nothing glamorous, nothing like the life he'd imagined. That Marinth had been cut off by most of the family once the truth came out, that she lived alone now, that even her friends had distanced themselves when they learned what she'd done. That Selais was working retail, a job she used to mock me for having when I was putting myself through college, that her social media had gone quiet, that she'd moved back in with her parents. I don't rejoice in their suffering, I'm not that person. But I recognize the symmetry, the poetry of it. They wanted to take everything from me, and in trying they lost everything themselves. Some promises aren't broken, they're reclaimed. I sit in my cabin now, watching the sun set through the window. The same window my father used to sit by when I was little. The place Marinth tried to steal. The place that's finally, truly mine again. The walls are covered with my paintings. The shelves lined with books I actually wanted to read, not books that looked impressive to visitors. The kitchen smells like bread I baked this morning. Everything here is mine, chosen by me, paid for by me, protected by me. My peace, my power, my voice, all reclaimed. I think about that little 6-year-old girl who made a silly promise while playing princess in the backyard. How that innocence was weaponized, twisted, used to control her entire life. How her own mother turned a moment of childhood imagination into decades of exploitation. But she's free now, I'm free now. I've learned that sometimes the family you're born into is the first prison you must escape. That blood doesn't mean loyalty. That love without respect is just control wearing a mask. I've learned that you can't heal in the environment that made you sick. That distance isn't cruelty, it's survival. That protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I've learned that the people who call you selfish are usually the ones upset that you stopped letting them use you. And I've learned that you don't owe anyone access to your life just because they're family. That you're allowed to close doors that should have never been opened. That you're allowed to walk away from people who only know how to take. I close my eyes and whisper the truth I earned with blood, paper, and silence. The truth that took me 32 years to learn. The truth that saved my life. I owe you nothing. And for the first time in my life, I believe it. My phone buzzes. A text from Carmen asking if I want to come over for dinner. From my book club group chat plan for next month's meeting. From my pottery teacher sending photos of the kiln firing. People who give as much as they take. People who see me as a whole person, not a resource. People who chose me because they wanted to, not because they wanted something from me. I text back, make plans, smile. Outside the window, the sun dips below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Colors I never noticed when I was busy surviving. But I notice them now. I notice everything now. And I finally understand what my father meant when he used to sit in this exact spot and say, Aurelia, someday you'll learn that the most important promise you can keep is the one you make to yourself. I thought I understood then, but I was just a child. Now I'm a woman who kept the only promise that ever mattered. The promise to stop sacrificing myself for people who never deserved it. The promise to reclaim my life. The promise to never again let anyone convince me that my purpose is to disappear, so someone else can shine. I stand up, stretch, and walk to the kitchen to pour a glass of wine. Tomorrow I'll paint. Maybe I'll drive into town and have coffee with Carmen. Maybe I'll just sit here and read. It doesn't matter, because the choice is mine. Every choice is mine now. And that freedom, that simple, quiet, beautiful freedom, is worth more than anything I ever gave away. I raise my glass to the empty room, to myself, to the woman I became when I finally stopped being who everyone else needed me to be. Here's to promises broken, I whisper, and to the ones finally kept. The cabin is silent, except for the wind through the trees and the distant sound of the creek my father used to take me to. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am free, and I am finally home. If this story moved you, if you've ever felt erased by the people who were supposed to protect you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, tell me your story, you're not alone. And remember, you don't owe anyone a life that destroys yours. Subscribe for more stories about survival, strength, and reclaiming everything they tried to take from you.